All right, this one is episode 3, the Trinity. And like I said, I will start my videos, at least episodes 2, 3, 4, and 5, with this. If you are happy with your Christian faith, stop watching my videos, please. You don't need what I'm offering, and if you aren't seeking change, it's going to be a waste of time for you. But if you are leaving Christianity because things just don't make sense and you're open to a Jewish interpretation of Jesus, then this very well could be for you. I do not claim to have it all figured out. I'm relearning things daily, but you're welcome to sojourn with me. All right, this one is Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. The conversation that Jesus had with God or with himself has always confused me. So the text that I'm talking about is Matthew 26, 36 through 46. So Matthew 26, verse 36. I'm not going to read it word for word. Probably most people are pretty familiar with this, or at least with this text. So it says, then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, which is the Garden of Gethsemane, which is just outside of the Eastern Gate in Jerusalem. If you were to walk out of the temple through the East Gate, you would walk through the Kidron Valley, and you would immediately be in the Garden of Gethsemane. That is where some people say Jesus was crucified. That's all debatable. No one really knows, except for the Catholic Church, of course, because they know where everything is. But sarcasm. All right, so it says, Jesus said, sit here while I go over there and pray. And he took Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee along with him and began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. Verse 39, going a little further, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, my Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. What does that mean? Why a cup? So the disciples, I know this, everything's nuanced, everything's debatable, right? But some people say that Jesus had just done a Seder. Some people would say, well, elements weren't there, so it wasn't a Seder, but it was like a Seder. Nonetheless, Jesus is using the metaphor of the cup, where you have like the cup of, there's 4 cups in a Passover Seder. There's like the cup of plagues, the cup of redemption, the cup of salvation. I forget what the last one is, but nonetheless, Jesus is just continuing that because they most likely just had a Seder, and he's saying he wants this cup, one of the cups. He wants one of the cups to be taken from him, but he also says, not as I will, but you will. In this conversation that he has, and it continues where Jesus has to go back to the disciples 3 times, and each time he has to wake them up. Why? Because they had just consumed 4 cups of wine, and that's a lot. So I've done plenty of seders, and that's, I don't do a full cup each time we're called to. I do a half a cup, because if not, it's really hard to complete the Seder. So, but at the end of this, he winds up ending saying, then he returned to the disciples and said to them, are you still sleeping and resting? Look, the hour has come, and the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer. So I used to, when I was a kid, I was always asked my dad about this conversation that Jesus had, because it didn't make sense to me as a kid. If Jesus is God, why was he so worried, and why are there two wills? Why does he have a different will than the Father? Because he says, not my will, not but your will. It just doesn't make sense. If God is one and Jesus is part of the Trinity, how, I guess not why, but how can they have a different will? So my dad would always say, well, being in the flesh, Jesus didn't have all the powers that but it's like I don't see that. It doesn't say that in Scripture. To be honest, if you read the Scripture, Jesus is only man. Now I know that people are going to argue with me because I used to debate this too. Things like the Father and I are one. How do you explain that? Well, I understand that now. I used to think that that was Jesus claiming to be God, and that is not the case. So it's real interesting. So there's an understanding of the Jewish soul that has been lost in Christianity, and there are things in Christianity that things that Christians don't understand, like the relationship with Elijah, where Elijah had a great soul basically, and Elisha, his mentor, asked that he would have a double portion when he went into heaven through the whirlwind. Some people say he went up in a chariot of fire, and that's not exactly what the Hebrew says. It says that the chariot of fire parted the ways, and Elijah went up in a whirlwind. But when he did that, Elisha asked for a double portion of his soul, which doesn't really make sense. I kind of have skipped over it in the past because it's like, well, I don't understand it. But if you understand the Jewish soul, it makes a lot more sense. And that concept, I'm not going to go into it right now on that in this podcast, because that's probably a multi-series video that we need to do. But that concept is what you get with the in the New Testament with John the Baptist, where John the Baptist had part of that soul also, and Yeshua also had piece of that soul. And just the whole concept of soul is just really lost in Christianity. I'm not going to go into that right now, but I do want to talk about where it says right here, where Yeshua calls himself the Son of Man. It's really interesting. So in verse 45, it says, look, the hour has come and the Son of Man is delivered. So what does that mean? In Christianity, this is a definition here. In Christianity, Son of Man is a title Jesus used for himself that has a double meaning, referring to both his full humanity and his divine messianic role in the prophesied figure from the book of Daniel. But in Judaism, if you look up Son of Man Judaism, it'll say primarily means mortal human, and is used to emphasize the frailty and weakness of humanity in contrast to God. So when Jesus is calling himself the Son of Man, what does that mean? How can we, which is it? Which one is is accurate? That's real interesting, because one is claiming deity, the other one is just claiming totally human, that Jesus is completely human. And to me, the conversation that he has in the Garden of Gethsemane, I don't have to, if Jesus is upset and doesn't want to do this because he's just human, it makes perfect sense. He's saying, Father, please, any other thing besides this. I it's hard to believe that it's really complex. If Jesus is just the Son of Man, meaning human, it all makes sense. If he isn't just man, then it winds up becoming something that has to be explained, and that's problematic. But that's just one term, Son of Man. In the New Testament, Jesus is often called the Son of God also. So that's an interesting term. Here's the definition in Christianity. The Son of God is Jesus Christ, and that's it. No one else. Who is understood to be the divine Son of God and Father, fully human and a member of the Trinity. The title refers to Jesus' unique authority, his deity, and his unique relationship with God the Father, not a biological relationship or an adoption into a divine family as Christians are. It's really interesting. So, but if you take that same phrase, Son of God, and you do research and you look at the definition of that in Judaism, it says in Judaism, Son of God, or Ben Elohim. And Ben Elohim just means Son of God, or Son of Elohim. And Elohim is a pretty common name for God. So in Genesis 1:1, Bereshit bara Elohim. So in the beginning, Elohim created the heavens and the earth. So it's nothing too crazy. But so in Judaism, Son of God, or Ben Elohim, is a metaphorical term for those with a special relationship with God rather than a literal biological connection. This honorific can refer to individuals like King David or King Solomon, the nation of Israel as a whole, or even angels and pious people. So basically, in Judaism, anybody can be a son of God. Anyone who is Jewish can be a son of God. But you see it in the Old Testament where King David is a son of God and Solomon is a son of God. So when you look at Jesus being the Son of God in Christianity, everyone assumes deity. But it's not always. In fact, up until the New Testament, none of it meant deity. It was just human. So who has the term right? But that metaphor of Son of God, it's also mentioned in the New Testament in Luke 3:38. You have the genealogy of Jesus. It's a backwards genealogy list, so it starts with Jesus, then Joseph, and then his father, blah blah blah, all the way back to in verse Luke 3:38, where it says Son of God, or it says the son of Enosh, or the son of Enoch, the son of Seth, the son of Adam, the son of God. So Adam is a son of God, And Jesus is a son of God, and Solomon is a son of God, David is a son of God. But in Christianity, if you ask, how is Adam the son of God? It's going to throw people off. But if you understand that term in a Jewish context, it makes a whole lot more sense. The primary issue is that, like I said in the second video, or the last video I did, the concept of Jesus being God is not there in the first century. It's not there in the first, it's starting to rain, so hopefully you can still hear me with the rain. We'll see how that works out. The concept wasn't in the first century, and it started creeping into a theology that was crushed in 220 CE. So there was a man named Sibelius, and I'm no expert in this. I've just done some research here, so if I mispronounce the name, I apologize. But there was a man named Sibelius who was excommunicated by the Pope around 220 CE because he thought and taught that Jesus and God were the same thing, the same substance. His theology is also called modalism, where they believe that Jesus was one mode of God and the Spirit is one mode of God, but the term that he was teaching was, he was using the phrase one substance, or homoousios. And if you look that up, the Greek word for one substance is, in the context of God, is homoousios. This term, used in the Nicene Creed, comes from homo, meaning same, and ousios, meaning being or substance. It was used to assert that Jesus Christ is of one substance, or the same divine essence as God the Father. That idea crept into the church in 325 again. So this, the people who followed Sibelius, they were excommunicated. He was, and his people were excommunicated in 220 for thinking that Jesus and God were one substance, or the same, which wound up becoming that idea didn't really disappear. It came back in the Council of Nicaea in 325, when Emperor Constantine chose that same word, homoousios, to describe God and Jesus' nature. Now, you got to understand, this guy in 220 was kicked out because his theology was that way. And then 15 years later, you have Constantine, who was a sun worshiper, who was not a Christian. He maybe was a Christian in his deathbed, but he did not live as a Christian. He still worshipped Mithra. He was pagan, but he wanted to put his 2 cents into the Council of Nicaea 325, and that idea became basically canon. And by 381, by the Council of in 381, that concept was definitely set, where the Trinity became canon. So let me just explain this again. The idea of Jesus being God, people were excommunicated in 220. In 325, the people, or the emperor, said, hey, homoousios, that's how God is, and no one questioned it, no one argued with him, even though it had been excommunicated. That idea had been kicked out of the church, but then it came back in. So the earliest movements of the church didn't see Jesus as deity, it took a couple hundred years for that idea to come into existence. Then it was crushed, and then it came back in, and now the church just accepts this Trinity idea that Constantine, a sun worshiper, allowed or pushed to have into his church. It's really wild. I didn't realize all of that, and I mean, look it up. If anybody wants links, ask me. I can give you resources. But I mean, it's a pretty common known thing that this idea was not first century. James, the brother of Jesus, Paul, people like that did not think that Jesus was deity. And maybe we'll get into that, because I used to argue that when Jesus says the Father and I are one, I used to think that that was a claim of deity, but that is not the case. So we'll get into that later. I hope you enjoyed this.